Good afternoon, Rowan. It's the 13th of January 2017 and it's about 3:30 in the afternoon. And obviously this is my usual Friday video to reassure you that I won't be seducing any priests over the weekend, so you can relax. Because I know that you're so concerned about me and my virtue, aren't you? That's the only thing that's been motivating you all these years. And obviously, anyway, I'm saving myself for my beloved because he's so wonderful and we're made for each other. Anyway, I thought we could have a talk about an article that you wrote in the Church Times, which is an Anglican newspaper in Britain. And you've written one of the comments in the comments section, which is really good because the comments section is free. And obviously, I wouldn't be paying anything to read your garbage. So anyway, the title of this article, as you can see, is "The Local and the Global Can't Be Separated." Maybe that's the other way around. I haven't got the title written down in front of me, so I can't see it. But anyway, the local and the global can't be separated. And I think that I'm the local and you're the global. Well, bad news, boyo. We're totally separate and we're never going to be together. So get that through your head. So here's the first part of the article now. "The year is going, let him go," Tennyson wrote in memoriam. Many will have echoed those words as 2016 ended. Well, that's probably true, but you go on, as I'm going to talk about in a minute, to relate this to political events nationally and internationally, whereas the majority of people who would have thought at the end of 2016 "the year is going, let him go" were probably thinking about more personal events in their life, some bad things that had happened to them personally, like bereavement or job loss or something like that. You, as I'm going to go on to say, relate this to national and international politics. So you say, whatever their place on the political spectrum, they will have been through a year of exceptional upheaval in public life, nationally and internationally. Most of us do not relish such an eventful programme. Well, I don't think that the majority of people are so emotionally affected by national and international events as you are. And the reason that you're so emotionally affected by these things, and you talk about grieving about a referendum that happened 6 months before, and that you don't shrug it off and you don't move on, and this kind of thing, which I've mentioned in a previous video, it's because you're fixated at this very early stage of psychological development, and you don't know where you end and the rest of the world, the rest of the universe begins. You've got no personal boundaries because your personality is unformed. And so it's very hard for you to discern what is you and what is the rest of the world. And this is why you take political events at a national and international level very personally, as if they're personally attacking you, and the people who vote the way you don't want them to in a referendum or in the American elections, it's very personal to you because you don't know the difference between you and everything else. And you also think that the whole universe revolves around you as well because you're fixated in this very early stage of development, as I've mentioned in previous videos. So I very much doubt there were that many people who were thinking "the year is going, let him go" at the end of 2016 in relation to national and international events. Much more likely that they were thinking about that if they were in relation to personal events. So you're quite unusual in your attitude to things on the large scale. This is the personal reason, one of the personal reasons why you think collectivism is such a great thing, because you've got no real sense of yourself and your own boundaries. So you then say, the arguments of the past year have revealed here and in the United States a disturbing level of dividedness in society. So I think division is the word that you're looking for, but you've invented a new word, dividedness. You have a habit of turning verbs into nouns. I've talked about that before. You've got quite a bizarre relationship to language. So the word there is division, not dividedness. So there has been a revolt against a certain kind of internationalist vision, a deep anger about the neglect of local needs and fears that are most immediate to people outside the circle of decision makers and opinion formers. The neglect of the voice of those who are made to feel superfluous in the new world of the global economy. Much of the most animated and often embittered argument has been about national boundaries and the claims of migrants. So you're doing something again that I've commented that you do before. Whenever anybody opposes you or opposes your political agenda, then you always attribute emotional motives to them. Like you talked, I've used this example before, but you were talking about a majority of people in South Wales voting in the referendum in Britain to leave the European Union. More people there voted to leave, a higher proportion than in other parts of the country. And you said that this is because they were fearful. And I said in relation to that, and I'm saying it in relation to this, that you're attributing emotional motives to people who may have very rational reasons for thinking and acting in a certain way. And the reason that you do this is because you're very driven by your emotions. And I'm going to play a clip to demonstrate that in a minute of something that you've said in a previous video. I've actually played this clip before anyway. But you're very driven by your emotions, and this is why you attribute emotional motives to other people. And this is because you're exceptionally immature and you don't understand that other people may have rational adult reasons for thinking and acting in the way that they do. You're globalizing your own experience and your own approach to life. And this is why you do this. So you dismiss the arguments of your political opponents as being irrational and emotional, whereas in fact it's you who's irrational and emotional due to your exceptional immaturity.
A couple of questions, just wanting clarification on how can we be more emotionally intelligent? I think we all feel we want to be, but can you give us a lesson?
Oh, you know, deep breathing and that sort of thing. Well, this could take a long time to talk about, and I don't want to claim to be any sort of an expert, but what I'm probing for, I think, is a willingness to stop and look at how we're feeling. There's a big difference between lashing out and saying, I'm angry. And that's a very small thing, but it's the beginning of understanding that my immediate upsurge of feeling is not, as I said, the be-all and end-all. I'm angry. I'm impatient. I'm lustful. I'm greedy. Okay, stop and look. As it were, put it on the table in front of you and say, yeah, that's how I'm feeling. That's what we have language for. It's to put things where we can see them, and where others can as well. Because the next step may be to say to somebody else, actually, I'm angry. Can we talk about this? Rather than just, as I say, lashing out and assuming my anger gives me the right to do what I choose. And looking back on it, I can say, oh well, a red mist came over my eyes. So that's a beginning of emotional intelligence, and it means, I think, a willingness to take time between the first sensing of an emotion and what we do about it. And that requires a discipline of some inner stillness, the willingness to give yourself that space to look. And it's rather like what one of the 4th century monastic writers says about temptation. He says, of course, the first thing you've got to do is register that this is the feeling that's there. Don't lie about it, don't evade it, don't deny it, it's there. But the crucial question is, are you then going to indulge it? Are you going to invite it in, explore it, let it sort of leak all over the place? Or are you going to look at it, pray with it, work with it? And that's a start.
So you go on to say, boundaries no longer feel safe. Well, if you're talking about my personal boundaries, they're very safe, Rowan. There is a growing sense that extreme terrorist violence can reach directly into our neighbourhoods. Oh, you mean like in my video I said my neighbour was terrorising me? That's what you're talking about, isn't it? Global economic instability is seen to have a direct impact on jobs and incomes on the doorstep. Well, that's true, it does, actually. But your solutions to these things are guaranteed to make the problem worse, aren't they? This is what you do, isn't it? You create problems and then present yourself as the saviour, as I've said in other videos. So you then say, and the Prime Minister's remarks in September at the Conservative Party conference about the impossibility of being a global citizen crystallised some of this resentment. To be a citizen, Mrs May insisted, is to be committed to making this specific local community work, and for this you need clear, unambiguous, local and historical loyalties. Well, I'd go a bit further than that, actually. Rather than talking about making your community work, I'd talk about the individual behaving in an ethical way. So I'd reduce it even more than just the local community area, because if you're behaving in an ethical way towards your fellow human beings, then the community benefits. And your tendency, Rowan, to collectivise everything, whether it's on a national or an international scale, or a whole denomination of the church, or the whole church, or even a local community is a collective, although a much smaller one than the ones that you're promoting. But you have this tendency to promote collectivism to deflect attention away from your individual amoral behaviour. So I'd go even further than that and say really it's the individual responsibility to be behaving in an ethical way once a person has reached the age of reason anyway, and prior to that, in almost all instances, a person's parents would be taking care of them and educating and socialising them in moral values, among other things. Anyway, you do say quite a lot about the Prime Minister's speech, Theresa May's speech at the Conservative Party conference in September 2016. So, since some of what you say is hardly recognisable as being part of the speech, I've never listened to any politician's speech before at a party conference, so I've had to listen to two to see if what you're saying bears any resemblance to reality. So I think she made two speeches, one at the beginning and one at the end, and so I've put some clips of selections of those speeches because some of what you say later on is hardly recognisable as coming from the same speeches. Which is not unusual in your case, because whatever your pretending to be quoting usually turns out to be saying the opposite of what you say that the person says. It's not quite as stark in this instance, but you do have a tendency to misrepresent the things that other people say, don't you? As I've demonstrated countless times now. So you then say, part of the attack was directed against an international elite of the super wealthy whose global citizenship seems most apparent in their reluctance to pay taxes in any of the societies whose members actually create their wealth. She does actually say something about that, actually. I've put a clip of what she says about that in the compilation I'm going to play in a minute. But I just want to say, Rowan, that just because you're against globalism doesn't mean you have to be for taxation. The two things don't necessarily go hand in hand. So you're trying a sleight of hand here, aren't you? To say if you're against taxation, that means you're for the global elite. This is complete nonsense, because the real elite, who people hardly ever see in the media and so on, they're the ones who are really benefiting from all these taxes, because most of what we pay goes for paying interest on loans of fiat currency, which they just created out of nothing, which I've talked about in videos before. So it's not necessary to be in favour of taxation if you're against globalisation. The two things don't necessarily go together. Anyway, I'm going to play some clips now of the British Prime Minister Theresa May speaking at the Conservative Party conference in September 2016.
Now, I want to tell you a little more about the process for triggering Article 50. The first thing to say is that it is not up to the House of Commons to invoke Article 50, and it's not up to the House of Lords. It is up to the government to trigger Article 50, and the government alone. When it legislated to establish the referendum, Parliament put the decision to leave or remain inside the EU in the hands of the people, and the people gave their answer with emphatic clarity. So now it is up to the government not to question, quibble or backslide on what we've been instructed to do, but to get on with the job. Because those people who argue that Article 50 can only be triggered after agreement in both houses of Parliament are not standing up for democracy, they're trying to subvert it. They're not trying to get... They're not trying to get Brexit right, they're trying to kill it by delaying it. They're insulting the intelligence of the British people. And that is why next week I can tell you that the Attorney General himself, Jeremy Wright, will act for the government and resist them in the courts. Yet within our society today, we see division and unfairness all around, between a more prosperous older generation and a struggling younger generation, between the wealth of London and the rest of the country, but perhaps most of all, between the rich, the successful, and the powerful, and their fellow citizens. Now, don't get me wrong. We applaud success. We want people to get on. But we also value something else, the spirit of citizenship. That spirit that means you respect the bonds and obligations that make our society work. That means a commitment to the men and women who live around you, who work for you, who buy the goods and services you sell. That spirit that means recognizing the social contract that says you train up local young people before you take on cheap labor from overseas. That spirit that means you do as others do and pay your fair share of tax. But today, too many people in positions of power behave as though they have more in common with international elites than with the people down the road, the people they employ, the people they pass on the street. But if you believe you're a citizen of the world, you're a citizen of nowhere. You don't understand what the very word citizenship means. So if you're a boss who earns a fortune but doesn't look after your staff, an international company that treats tax laws as an optional extra, a household name that refuses to work with the authorities even to fight terrorism, a director who takes out massive dividends while knowing that the company pension is about to go bust. I'm putting you on warning. This can't go on anymore. A change has got to come, and this party is going to make it. Just listen to the way a lot of politicians and commentators talk about the public. They find your patriotism distasteful, your concerns about immigration parochial, your views about crime illiberal, your attachment to your job security inconvenient. They find the fact that more than 17 million voters decided to leave the European Union simply bewildering. Because if you're well off and comfortable, Britain is a different country, and these concerns are not your concerns.
So those were some relevant parts of Theresa May's speeches there. So you go on to say in this article, but the speech was also taken by some to be a comment on how we respond to needs beyond our national boundaries, including the needs of those who have felt driven from their own homes. Well, how do you feel driven from your own home? You're either driven from your own home or you're not driven from your own home. How you feel about it is irrelevant. And by the way, I've been driven from my own home because of you. So, the speech was also taken by some to be a comment on how we respond to the needs beyond our national boundaries, including the needs of those who have felt driven from their own homes. She doesn't actually really refer to anything like that, as far as I remember, from the whole speech. She talks about Britain being a global country or something to that effect, but she's talking about Britain as a nation, in relation to other parts of the world. So it's not really part of her speech to be talking about how to respond to refugees. That's not an area that she really addresses in it. So I don't know who would have been taking it that way when it's not what she said. So you then say the tens of millions for whom extreme local violence or catastrophe have made those homelands terrifyingly unsafe, who will take whatever risks and spend whatever resources they can to find a safer place for their family's future. Well, you're doing a typical extreme left-wing thing here in that you only speak about people as a group, as a collective, in the aggregate, and you won't address the individual situation of anyone. In fact, you use the collective as an excuse for dismissing individual needs. So you won't address the fact that I've been driven from my home, that I came from a poor background, that I'm a woman, and you've treated me in this vile, abusive way. You want to say that you're saving poor people and you're saving women, and you're saving these people in other parts of the world and so on who've been driven from their homes, but you will never address the issue that I belong to some of the categories that you say that you're saving, and you're responsible for these terrible things that have happened to me, including being driven from my own home and terrorised by abusive people because of you. So you don't want to address that issue, so you just virtue signal by making empty political statements about how much you care about people who belong to these categories that you've decided. And I actually belong to a number of those categories, and look how you've treated me in a vile and abusive way to try and bring me under your control. So you're not concerned about these people in the slightest, are you? You're only concerned about asserting your imagined moral superiority. You're extremely narcissistic. You talk about, as I've mentioned previously, you talked about taking care of all of the world's children. And I said, well, the vast majority of them have got their parents to take care of them perfectly adequately. But the reason you think that children need taking care of by people other than their parents is because you weren't taken care of adequately when you were a child. So you've had this bad experience and you imagine that other people other than children's parents need to take care of them. The state needs to take over. Some global organisation like the United Nations needs to take over. And this is all because of your experience of inadequate parenting, that you're looking for the state to act as parents, when really you need to resolve your own issues and stop globalising them and imagining that everybody has the same bad experience of parents that you had. Obviously, parents are not perfect, but there's a difference between not being perfect and being good enough, and just being absolutely appalling like your parents were and doing everything they could to make every situation as bad as they possibly could, which is actually what you do in relation to the people you pretend to be taking care of. You try and find out people's vulnerabilities so that you can exploit and control them. So you've got no concern at all for doing anything that's really helpful to people. So you then say about these tens of millions of people who've felt they had to flee their homes. These are not people aspiring to be global citizens. They want to belong and contribute either in their host country or in their home country when peace is restored. Rootless and irresponsible is exactly not what they are seeking. So that may be the case, but I'm not sure what the point of you saying that is. Who has the idea that this is how these people are? Although, to be fair, there are people who present themselves as refugees and they are rootless and irresponsible. Some people are like that. That's why there's a system in host countries to find out who has a legitimate claim for political asylum, for example, and who hasn't, who's maybe moving into the host country in a rootless and irresponsible way. And I have actually worked on the ground with people seeking asylum and had colleagues working with them as well. And in many cases, the people have fled from terrible situations. But in other cases, it's a little harder to believe that that's the case. And there are occasions when people keep changing the name of the country that they say that they came from just to give the name of a country where they think if they come from there, then they would be more likely to be accepted as a refugee, given refugee status in Britain. And then when an expert from the Home Office interviews the person doesn't even know anything about the country they say that they come from, doesn't speak the language, doesn't know the capital city, and all this kind of thing. So it's not the case that everyone who presents themselves as needing to flee a bad situation or seek refugee status actually has that background. There are a number of people who come for different reasons but think they'll be more likely to be allowed to remain in the country if they tell a different story. So there certainly are genuine refugees, but there are also people who are just taking the piss, frankly. So I've now skipped a couple of paragraphs where you're talking about child migrants coming to Britain. So you're now saying, the question is not, however, just about the hopes and thoughts of individual migrants? Well, it wouldn't be, would it? Because you never like to deal with the individual, as I've just been saying. You need to be making empty political statements and pretending to be caring for people in the aggregate, and this enables you to behave in a malevolent way towards individuals, which you definitely do. So you say, Mrs. May is entirely right to say that citizenship means a solid commitment to making specific communities work. But the truth is that this is a world where making those local communities work is bound up with global issues. No significant crisis of our time can be dealt with by the action of one nation alone. Well, this is just globalist nonsense. Most of the things that go on in local communities, the international situation really isn't that relevant. And in any case, I'm not too sure that you're talking about national or global politics here, or even community politics. I think you're the global issues and I'm the national issues. I think you're using these terms symbolically. So the truth is that this is a world where making those local communities work. So if I want people to stop harassing me, this is bound up with global issues, which is issues related to you, and that no significant crisis, like being attacked by a fire extinguisher, of our time can be dealt with by the action of one nation alone. So I think I'm the one nation alone, aren't I? Well, I am dealing with it, Rowan. And as I've said, if anyone else upsets me and my neighbours harass me or cause me any more problems, whenever they do that, I'm just going to upload a video every single day that they're causing me problems. And if you come up with the cunning plan of having them only causing me problems on days when I make videos anyway, then I'll just make some additional videos during the week. So, environmental risk and degradation. So my environment is quite risky. And I've also, oh yes, health threats as well. I've also talked about being an expert on health and safety. That's how I knew that you were lying about 9/11 when you said you'd found all those masks in an office building in Manhattan, in the financial district of New York. And I also said very recently that that's how I knew that fire extinguishers had a very short lifespan. Environmental risk and degradation. Well, you're treating me in a degrading way, and you've made my environment very threatening, haven't you, on purpose? Because what you want to do is to mind control me into thinking that you're my best option. So you've created all these problems for me, and you're presenting yourself as the saviour, which is a pattern in your behaviour, which I've talked about in videos before. So health threats, violence and terror. Well, health threats, of course. You've threatened me with psychiatry before, haven't you, in the lectures that you gave in the Diocese of Sheffield the day after I'd confronted you at Churches Together in South Yorkshire in autumn 2014. And I've described all of that before, so I won't say it again. But you've threatened me with psychiatry before. In fact, psychiatrists have threatened me and terrorised me as well in the past, kidnapping me and forcibly poisoning me. And then inventing a lot of delusions that I'm supposed to have when they're in fact deluded. I behave in an extremely rational way, and they seize on that as evidence of a delusion. They're completely mad. The lunatics are in charge of the asylum. So I think you're probably threatening me again here, aren't you, Rowan? Environmental risk and degradation, health threats, violence and terror. All these are challenges that do not stop at national boundaries. Well, they are stopping at my boundary, Rowan. And the point of having national boundaries in the system that we've got at the moment is that you can make decisions about who you allow to move into the country and who you don't. So threats of violence and terror and so on. Well, one of the points of national boundaries is to keep as many threats as possible outside the nation, which is rather basic. So having open borders, which you seem to be promoting and which you've been talking about violent maintenance of borders in various parts of the world, although of course you didn't specify where. It's just all impressionistic bullshit as usual. So if you keep people outside your national boundaries, then that probably would help to exclude a lot of threats, wouldn't it, that might otherwise move into the country. So you say they need some generous cooperation, a willingness to share control and yield some absolute national liberty to achieve a really effective response. So I'm not cooperating with you, Rowan, so don't even think about it. I've told you, I keep restating my boundaries. I'm not your mother, I'm not giving you what you want, and I'm not sharing control of my body and my life with you. You're a psychopath. You'll do anything that you can to try and manipulate me, to try and force me into giving you what you want. And I'm not your mother, I'm not giving you what you want, I'm restating my boundaries. My boundaries are not negotiable. I do not negotiate with abusive people, with psychopaths, and with sexual predators. And you fall into all of these categories, and so does your perverted pretend astrophysical clergy friend, David Pete, as well. They need some generous cooperation, a willingness to share control and yield some absolute national liberty to achieve a really effective response. Well, what does absolute national liberty even mean? You don't define these things. You just present these things anyway as if they're a really great idea. But what does absolute national liberty even mean? That you've got the right to control your borders, or what does that mean? What does it even mean?
Ignore it.
So you go on to say, ignoring or minimising the questions around displaced people does not make them go away. So I've just played the clip there, which I think explains the reason why you're saying that ignoring something doesn't make it go away, because you don't want me to keep on ignoring you and ignoring your petulant demands. You've actually done this before as well, but I didn't mention it last time. And so when you talk about ignoring or minimising, you're talking about my references to your microscopic floppy penis, aren't you? I don't know why you feel so inadequate about it, you know. Lots of people live perfectly adequate, fruitful lives with all kinds of disabilities. I mean, obviously you're not one of them, but lots of people do. So you're quite insecure about your micro penis. And this is why you're saying ignoring or minimising the questions around displaced people does not make them go away. Well, you can please yourself, Rowan, either go away or don't go away, but I'm still going to go on ignoring your petulant demands. I'm not giving in to you. I'm not your mother. Get it through your head that I'm not having anything to do with you. So you then say, and if we do not have a clear commitment to dealing with the root causes of displacement in their home countries, if we are not committed to helping them develop secure civil space, political justice and stability, and a properly sustainable and self-supporting economic life, we have no right to be surprised when the waves of unrest and frustrated hope wash against our shores with increasing force. Well, you're the one with frustrated hope, aren't you? And all this harassment washes against me with increasing force, and being attacked with fire extinguishers and so on, and all the other abuse that you've had me subjected to for the last 8 years, and also for 15 years before that. So that's quite a long time, isn't it? It's over 20 years of harassment and abuse and all kinds of catastrophes being engineered to try and force me to give you what you want because you're such a pathetic, inadequate little boy and you think the universe revolves around you and you won't take no for an answer. So the root causes of my displacement are that you're a psychopath and sexual predator who won't take no for an answer. And if we're talking about people living in war-torn areas of the world like Iraq and Afghanistan, then the reason for their displacement is also you and your propaganda around 9/11. So whatever way we interpret this article, you're responsible for the terrible things that are going on. If we are not committed to helping them develop secure civil space, so you want me to go and kiss the arse of your perverted astrophysical clergy friend, then don't you? This is what you keep saying over and over again. You're completely mad. And so if your frustrated hopes or his continue to wash against my shores with increasing force, then I'm just going to put more videos on YouTube drawing attention to your ongoing lunacy. So you go on to say, it does no harm to be reminded that no one learns anything about love for humanity without learning it in the context of particular and local loyalties. Well, that's true, actually, but you haven't learnt it in relation to anybody, have you? Because you don't even recognise the existence of other people. They're just ciphers, characters in your novel. Three-dimensional objects. You talk about other people in three-dimensional terms, which I've mentioned before in a video. Other people are just planks of wood that are either convenient to you or inconvenient to you. So you've got no love of humanity at all. So you're working to bring in a totalitarian one-world government of people who want to exterminate the vast majority of us and enslave all the rest, anybody who isn't them. So you've got no love of humanity and you haven't learnt it in childhood because you were treated in a very cruel way by your parents, both of them. And that was also after suffering a serious illness that left you disabled and sick for quite a lot of your childhood. So you haven't learnt about love and loyalty. You haven't learnt about love for humanity. You've got no love for anyone except yourself. You don't even care about your own children, as I've mentioned before, because you've sold them to achieve your own goals in life, let's put it that way. So you say the crucial discovery is when we realise that the true and best interest of our immediate neighbours, never mind ours in brackets. I think there must be a mistake there, I don't really understand that. The crucial discovery is when we realise that the true and best interest of our immediate neighbours is closely bound in with the well-being of those further away, and that the challenges that face apparently distant societies are not separate from our own. So I don't think you're even promoting globalism here. You're talking about my immediate neighbours harassing me, aren't you? And this is closely bound in, so you're talking about S&M again, with the well-being of those further away, meaning you and your perverted astrophysical clergy friend. So if I want my neighbours to be better, I have to give you what you want. That's what you're telling me, isn't it? So the challenges that face apparently distant societies, you're the distant society, aren't you? Well, how many times do I need to tell you, Rowan, I'd rather be tortured than have anything to do with satanic filth like you. And if you make it worse for me, I'll make it worse for you, because I'll just make more videos. So if you don't want me to do that, I suggest you stop these scumbags from harassing and abusing me. So you go on to say, either we learn to act together more effectively or we condemn ourselves to greater levels of anxiety and denial. Well, I've talked about you engineering all this abuse of me for decades to try and force me to act out your perverted sexual fantasies and to act in a way that would feed your narcissistic delusions. So you're talking about acting together here. Acting together with you, I suppose, or your delusional, perverted, pretend astrophysical clergy friend, David Pete. I think that's what you're referring to here. So I'm not going to be acting, and I'm not going to be together either. So put those thoughts right out of your head. Because anyway, I'm saving myself for my beloved because he's so wonderful and we're made for each other. We're going to be together on our bed of roses, having a really good time the minute that you're in prison. So if we don't act together more effectively, we condemn ourselves to greater levels of anxiety and denial. Well, you're in denial, aren't you? You're constantly in denial about your evil nature and your evil behaviour. You're extremely anxious as well. You talk about anxiety a lot. You've talked about we have a degree in anxiety or something like that, a PhD in anxiety. I've mentioned that in a video before where you were saying it on video actually. So you're using we in an impersonal sense, but you're actually talking about your own feelings. Of course, I've talked about having increased anxiety as well, terrible anxiety. When I was poisoned with haloperidol, it was in another dimension to anything else I've experienced, and I didn't even feel like myself. So you may be threatening me with psychiatry again because you've done that quite a few times before. And in fact, you and your lies about me having mental problems, as well as being a delinquent sex maniac and fantasist, this is what led these psychiatrists, isn't it, to believe that I had religious delusions or I had mental health problems or something like that. Because they certainly weren't getting it from anything that I said, because I never said anything to them about religion or religious experiences or anything. So any information they had about that came from other people. And you were the filter, really, weren't you? You were making up all this stuff about me, finding out things about me that I'd said to other people, spying on me everywhere, and I never said anything about religious experiences to you either. So anything you knew about that you got from other people, twisted it round, put your own slant on it as being part of your hate campaign against me to try and destroy me and bring me under your control. So no psychiatrist has ever got any information directly from me about that. They've got it through other people and they've been listening to what you say, and you are a pervert and a psychopath, but because you're a high status male and I'm just a piece of trash, they gave more authority to what you said and imagined that I was hiding something and then invented an explanation for why I went to stay in a monastery in Spain, which I've talked about on a previous video. So I act in a highly rational way and they seize on that as evidence of religious delusions because that's what they're really desperate to believe. So you say, language about being a citizen of the world may be used to cloak selfish and irresponsible patterns of activity. Oh, what, you mean like you do? Like all this virtue signalling and talking in this way to try and make out that you're a lover of humanity and that you're a moral person. And one of the functions this serves is acting as a cloak for your evil, abusive, predatory nature. So you say, not least in the world of transnational elites. Those would be the people that you work for then. But it would be a tragedy if we imagined that this justified us in forgetting the ideals of universal dignity and universal responsibility, which have helped to identify and combat many atrocities and abuses in the past decades. So I think you're talking in an astrophysical sense again here, aren't you? Well, it's not ideal, is it, having any involvement with Mr. Universe, so to speak. It's certainly not ideal to me, and I certainly won't be doing anything like that. So I'm not having anything to do with promoting the agenda of transnational elites or people who work for them like you and Tony Blair, who appointed you. And I suppose that pervert David Pete indirectly works for them as well, at least, because he was being puppeteered by you, wasn't he? He was bad enough by himself, but it won't have helped having you puppeteering his every action, will it? So these ideals of universal dignity and universal responsibility. So here you are talking in the abstract again, in the collective, and thinking that you can just make these empty political statements as a cloak for your utterly malevolent behaviour towards individuals, even individuals in the same categories for which you're supposed to have this great concern, which have helped identify and combat many atrocities and abuses in the past few decades. Well, at a political level, I don't know what you're talking about, but nothing has combated the many atrocities and abuses that have been perpetrated against me in the past few decades, and any combating that's been done has been done by me. Right, so this is the final section here, and you're quoting Tennyson again here. With Tennyson in mind again, perhaps these ideals should be what we hope to ring in again this year. Ring out false pride in place and blood. I'm going to play another clip from Theresa May's speech in a minute. The civic slander and the spite. Oh, what you mean? What you've perpetrated against me? You mentioned this in your radio interview, didn't you, on Sunday last week, on the 8th of January 2017, that I made my last video about. And you're the one who slanders and acts out of spite. Ring in the love of truth and right. Well, that would be really good. So when are you starting, Rowan? When are you starting telling the truth and doing what's right? Because it's you who never does either of those things. Ring in the common love of good. Well, that would be really good, except there isn't any common love of good, is there? Because common love of good would mean that everybody shared it. And not everybody does share it, do they? Because you certainly don't share it. You're a very malevolent character. You think the whole universe revolves around you and that other people should just be a continual source of narcissistic supply. And this is because you're fixated at a very early developmental stage, as I've said many times. Anyway, that's my video for today. But don't forget, I won't be seducing any priests over the weekend because I'm saving myself for my beloved, and I will be turning up to make a citizen's arrest for terrorism. So don't forget to be alert. Hasta la próxima.
You call for justice to start the truth.
Let's put an end to their sanctimonious pretense of moral superiority. Let's...
One New Year's resolution to consider, and it's not too late.
It's getting late for scraping and scratching on the paper. Something's gonna give under this pressure, and the cracks are already beginning to show. It's too late. The footman memorized the number, but the prince still holds both the slippers. And would you leave a palace for a bed sit and Canterbury tales? Canterbury tales.
Don't try to change me, you're wasting your time. Now I got something much better.
best sex.
Oh, what care I for my house and my land? What care I for my money? Oh, I'd rather have a kiss from the wild gypsy's lips. I'm away with the raggle taggle gypsy. I'm away with the raggle taggle gypsy. I'm away with the raggle taggle gypsy.